They went to Capernaum, and when the Sabbath came, he, Jesus, entered the synagogue and taught. They were astounded at his teaching, for he taught them as one having authority, and not as the scribes. Just then there was in the synagogue a man with an unclean spirit, and he cried out, "What have you to do with us, Jesus of Nazareth? Have you come to destroy us? I know who you are, the Holy One of God." But Jesus rebuked him, saying, "Be silent, and come out of him." And the unclean spirit, convulsing him and crying with a loud voice, came out of the man. They were all amazed, and they kept on asking each other, "Well, what is this? A new teaching with authority. He commands even the unclean spirits, and they obey him." At once his fame began to spread throughout the surrounding region of Galilee. So imagine it's your first day at work, and you sit down at your new desk, and you put out your shiny new stapler, and you put out the picture of your cat, and you're just getting the chair warm, and this guy bursts into your office and says, "What are you doing here? Who are you? Who gave you the authority to be here? Who told you you could sit at this desk? What are you trying to do? Destroy the whole office?" How'd that be for your first day at work? Well, welcome to Jesus' world. This story that we have today is his first day on the job. In Mark, it's his first example of his public ministry, and he starts it off by being confronted by a guy who's possessed by an unclean spirit. How many of you here like to be confronted or like confrontation? Come on, somebody. I tried to make a list of who I thought would be here this morning, and I came up with things I would confront each of you about if I got the chance. So anybody willing to volunteer? Yeah, I knew there'd be one of you out there that... Well, I'll say I don't like confrontation. I avoid confrontation at all costs. I'm the guy, like, if I'm about to pull into a space in the parking lot and somebody else slips in, I'm like, okay, I guess it was really theirs. Or if I'm at a restaurant and I order something and they bring kind of the wrong order, I'm like, well, this is probably about as good as what I was going to order. I don't want to say anything. And just this week, I was at the grocery store getting things for dinner, and I got home and realized they had not given me one of the bags of things that I needed to make dinner with. And I was frustrated and angry, but I did not want to have to go back and confront them about it. Somebody else in my house made me go back. But I did not want to do it. And I think most people avoid confrontation. So why does Mark begin his public ministry of Jesus and his gospel with confrontation? All the things he could have had Jesus doing first, like preaching about love or playing with children or praying in a garden somewhere, but he starts with confrontation. What's going on here in this story? Well, we all know that there's lots of ways you could read a gospel text and try to understand it. So first, you might just say, what's the story about? It's just a story about how Jesus could heal people. And that's what made him special, and that's why he's the Son of God, and that's why we follow him. And that's a perfectly okay reading of the text, and that's probably how most people would read the text. But I know for some of you here, there are elements of this text that might not sit right with you. Some of you are saying, well, I don't know that I believe that people could be possessed of evil spirits, and I'm not sure I believe that people could be healed in the way that Jesus does in the story, and so I have questions about that. And I do want to point out, though, that most people in the ancient world wouldn't have asked questions like that. They would have just accepted the story at face value because they assumed not only Jesus, but that lots of people could exorcise evil spirits. So that to them wasn't any big deal in the story. That's not what they would have looked at. But we might ask those questions, right? But the people in the ancient world would have said, well, sure, Jesus could exorcise spirits. Other people could do that. We're not questioning whether or not it happened. What the people in the ancient world would have said was, what does it mean? Why are you telling us this story about him, Mark? And so a third way to look at this text, and the way that I generally come to text, is to sort of do what I call circling the text. So here's the text, and every time you come to this text, you circle it, and you look at it from all the angles, and you try to get closer and closer to the center of the text and what's really going on here. And you ask yourself the question, is Mark up to something? And I have a little secret for you. The gospel writers, they're always up to something. There's always more going on here than meets the eye. And Mark is definitely up to something, but that when he chooses to start this story of Jesus' ministry with a confrontation. So let's look at the narrative real quickly again. Jesus comes into the synagogue. Remember, this is Jesus, the peasant guy from the nowhere place of Nazareth, comes into the synagogue, and it says he's teaching with authority, like they've never seen before. Now, what they mean by that is the scribes were usually the ones teaching in the synagogue, and they just kind of would teach by rote. They would just teach what they had been told to teach, nothing particularly spectacular. And here comes Jesus, and suddenly he's opening the text for them in a way maybe they haven't heard before, and he's bringing them truths that don't seem to come out of a scroll somewhere, but it's something he just understands innately. Maybe it's from God that he's getting this, and the text says something to the effect of they're astounded by it. And then this guy comes into the synagogue, and he's possessed of an unclean spirit, and it's making him kind of behave strangely, and Jesus heals him, and the people are astounded by that too. But actually, if they would really do a good translation of this text, they wouldn't use a word like astounded or impressed. They would have said that the people were alarmed by what Jesus is doing. They're disturbed by what Jesus has just done. They're panicked by what he's just done in front of them. Now, why are they freaking out about this? I mean, isn't all Jesus doing is leading a little Bible study and he's healing a sick person over here? If that's all that he's doing, why are they so bothered by this public act of his in the middle of the synagogue? Well, the clue to all this is this fact that Mark chooses this to be the story that he starts off Jesus' public ministry with. And I'll give you a little hint here. In all of the Gospels, if you don't want to read to the end and find out how the story turns out, all you have to do is find that very first thing that Jesus does in public in each of the Gospels, and it tells you who Jesus is going to be through the rest of the story. It tells you what kind of person Jesus is going to be in that Gospel writer's version of his story. And Mark chooses to start his Gospel of Jesus' public ministry with confrontation. Mark is saying to us, this is what his ministry is going to be about, confrontation. Jesus is going to be confronted, but he's also going to confront the powers that be, the social structure, the order that's set up. So why are they so bothered by this? Because Jesus, this nobody, this peasant from Nazareth, dares to step into the synagogue and preach with authority. Who's he to be preaching with authority? That's supposed to be the job of other people. And then Jesus dares when this unclean person comes into the temple who has no business being there. You're not supposed to be in the temple if you're unclean. And he heals them. He heals this person. And they're thinking, how dare he do this? We're not supposed to have unclean people with unclean spirits in the middle of the worship space. Well, let's be honest with ourselves. If we weren't ever supposed to have people with unclean spirits in church, this place would be empty on Sunday morning, right? Amen? Yeah. And Jesus knows that, and so he heals this person. And they're very upset by this. And in fact, the guy with the demon, the possession, says, who are you? What are you doing? By whose authority are you doing this? Are you trying to destroy us? But I'm convinced, actually, that Mark's playing a little trick on us here. Mark has actually taken the thoughts of the scribes and put them into the mouth of the demon-possessed man. Because it's the scribes there saying, who is this guy? What's he doing? By what authority does he come in and shake everything up? Is he trying to mess up the way things are set up here? And that's exactly what he's trying to do. Jesus in the story isn't just exercising a one person of one spirit. He's starting a whole ministry of exercising his whole culture of the demons, of the spirits that possess the people, his people. The demons that keep them down, that oppress them, that ostracize people, that keep people pushed off to the margins. He's about to mess up that whole system, which is great if you're a person being oppressed in that day, right? That he's offering you freedom and release, and he's letting go of those spirits that possess you, that keep you down. But if you benefit from the system that's set up at the time, if you're a person in power like the scribes and the other people that led in the synagogue and then the temple, this is bad news for you. You don't want to hear anything of it. And in fact, it's later in Mark's gospel that these scribes will accuse Jesus himself of being possessed of a demon. And it's later in Mark's gospel that the scribes and other people in power will silence Jesus, like he silenced the demon. And we know by the end of Mark's gospel, it will be the scribes and other people in power who will destroy Jesus in his crucifixion on the cross. And so Mark is telling us a story. If you're going to follow this guy Jesus, and you're looking for the nice Jesus who's nice to people and stands around with a little lamb in his hand just petting it and smiling, You're not going to find that Jesus in the Gospel of Mark. That Jesus is not there. This is the Jesus who's going to confront any kind of oppression, any kind of system that's set up, a social structure set up that oppresses other people. He's going to be there to confront it and offer an alternative. He's not just there to say this is wrong. He offers an alternative. And what does he call it? The kingdom of God. And in the kingdom of God, things are turned upside down. And those that are oppressed are set free from whatever holds them back, possesses them, keeps them from being fully the person that they're created to be. And so Jesus says to the man possessed of the unclean spirit, which do you want, to confront me or to be free? And in essence, the scribes get exactly the same invitation. Which do you want, to confront me or to be free? And I want to suggest to us today, friends, reading the gospel now, we're offered the same invitation. Which do we want? To confront Jesus or to be set free by Jesus? How many of us sometimes say what we heard in the worship service last week? Jesus, do I really have to follow you? Can't I just admire you from a distance? I mean, come on, Jesus, do I have to do all this stuff can't I just live the life I'm already living and it's comfortable and I'm used to it? And why do you have to come and mess everything up? You know, I've heard it put this way once. I really like this analogy. It's like we all live in a cage, each of us in our own cage, all right? You picture that? And we've been in these little cages so long, we don't even remember who put us in those cages. But it wasn't, maybe some of us put us ourselves in there, but most of us, somebody else put us in those cages. And we've lived in them so long that even though it's a cage and it's not the best place to live, we've gotten used to it. It's what we know. It's the habit. It's just status quo. And so we've kind of just settled in to live in our cage. And then one day, Jesus shows up, and he's standing outside your cage, and he looks at it and he says, you know, there's no lock on this door. You can leave anytime you want. And we kind of scratch our heads and say, I don't know. Do I want to leave? I don't know what's out there. I don't know what's different if I walk out of this cage. And then Jesus even swings open the door and says, come on out. It's a lot better out here than it is in there. Being held down and held back. There's a great abundance out here. There's love out here. There's light out here for you. How many of us would say yes to it? How many of us would say, I know the cage. I'm going to stay in the cage. Friends, I think at our best, when we are church, when we're the family of God together, I think at our best what we do is we help each other name what those cages are, or name what those unclean spirits are that possess us, that keep us down, that keep us in bondage, that hold us back. And to be certain, it's different for every person here. For some of us, that unclean spirit or that cage might be low self-esteem, or it might be an addiction of some kind, or it might be something personally we're struggling with. It might be worries and fears about the future, or a relationship problem or something. For all of us, it's different, that thing that holds us back, that keeps us in bondage. But at our best, what we do is we get to know each other well enough. We love each other enough to know what those things are. And we walk with each other in that attempt to get out of those cages, those things that hold us back from fully receiving God's love. And we remind each other in that process that God doesn't walk away from us when we're in that struggle. God actually draws closer to us. And the way that we know the reality of God's love most of the time is by the way we love each other, and we carry that love with us out into the world. So the good news of the gospel for us today is that Jesus offers us a choice to get out of those things that keep us in bondage, that hold us back from being fully the person we're created to be, and offers us freedom. Freedom in God's love and grace. The hard news in today's gospel is that sometimes we're not sure we want that freedom. Sometimes we're so comfortable in our brokenness and our insecurities that we're just afraid to see what might be out there next. And we know that if we walk out of that cage or we let go of those demons that possess us and follow Jesus, He's going to mess up our life in a way we don't exactly know what it'll be. So Mark's Jesus leaves us today wondering, which do we choose? Confrontation? Leave us alone, Jesus. Or freedom in God's love? Let's pray. Gracious and loving God, we are challenged by this story today of Jesus exercising the demons of his culture that were holding people back, the systems of oppression that were keeping people down, and knowing their full identity as the beloved of you. Help us not to fool ourselves in thinking that's just an ancient story. It's our story too. Help us to help each other find freedom and release in your love and your grace. And all God's people say, amen.